I brought you guys in here to talk about metric. Metric is required, as we all know, and it's the seed to sale tracking system. Our clients, most of them don't like metric. It has some glitches, it's difficult to use, and it can get them in trouble, right? But specifically, I wanted to ask you guys about metric cleanups. I know you guys have both recently helped clients through the metric cleanup process. So, basically a metric cleanup is their inventory doesn't match, the physical inventory doesn't match what's in metric, and it's become of such a significant degree that they have to go to the CCB and ask permission. So why don't you guys tell me what goes into metric cleanup, and some helpful hints for getting through the process, because I know you both have done it recently.
Well, one thing I think that is good is that it's easy to know when you need one now because of the quarterly inventory reports that changed. It was probably third or fourth quarter, probably third quarter, right, of 2022. So you basically input your metric cleanup and then it shows up red if you need one. So it's obvious if you need one.
Yeah,
so that's
it's green if your inventory's good.
Yeah.
It's yellow if you're close to needing a cleanup but not there yet. And it turns red if you need one, right? So it's very obvious, hey, something's gone a little wrong with your inventory. You need a metric cleanup, right? And so then by regulation, you have to investigate. You can't just make adjustments in metric without investigating them. Even if you're in the green and you have a variance of 1 unit, you can't just make that 1 unit adjustment. You're supposed to investigate. But obviously, if you've gotten to the red and you need a metric cleanup, it's a little more detailed process. So what are the things you need, Kevin?
I think the metric cleanup process really highlights the logs that are required and to be maintained, because you need backup documentation. So if you're gonna say you're missing 100 pre-rolls, and your inventory and your physical inventory and your metric inventory don't match, they're gonna want to see why. And so if you can simply pinpoint, on X date we wrote down that we made 500, but you can see through our production log, our packaging log, our waste logs from the creation of the product that we made 100 less. You're able to significantly show with documentation this is what our number should be. It was a simple typographical error when entering it into the system, and it's a pretty cut and dry, case closed. You've answered the question. Where are those 100? They actually didn't exist, and you can show through your paperwork. You don't have those documents. Now you've got 100 missing pre-rolls without an explanation, and the CCB has been known to assume theft because where else are they going? They just don't disappear.
I think you're right. If you're claiming entry error, right, as a reason, which is a very common reason for a metric adjustment, having the logs that are required help support that backup documentation, right? We typed in 500 pre-rolls produced, but we actually only produced 400. Here's our production log. Very easily defend that position. But like you said, Kevin, if you're like, oh, it was an entry error, we meant 400, but we can't support that in any way, then the CCP is going to want further investigation. Besides backup documentation, which usually is in the form of logs, sometimes at sales facilities it can be in the form of like point of sale receipts and sales reports.
Summary reports and such.
What else besides backup documentation do you need?
2% verified inventory count.
2% verified inventory count.
Yes.
So what does that mean?
So basically pull your metric inventory and then have 2 people count everything and then compare it. And then from that, once you figure out what the variance is, you create a variance-only spreadsheet.
And when you say count everything...
I mean count everything.
You mean count everything?
Yeah. So
Open the boxes, count the pre-rolls.
And what we've seen is that, if you have a box that's unopened, sometimes facilities will just say, well, X amount is supposed to be in that box, so that's the amount we're going to put in there, instead of actually opening it and then taking everything out and counting everything individually, the regulations require that you do a physical count of everything.
Yeah, and I have seen where people who didn't do that and were going through the metric cleanup process, they got a directed plan of correction where the CCB mandated that they do it and turn over video of them counting everything, or the CCB was going to come count.
Yep.
So that 2% verified inventory, it's really means count everything. Open each box, pull out each item, count it, or weigh everything, right? If it's a weight item.
Physically touch everything.
Yeah, and to physically touch, you have to have a
Agent card.
agent card. Seems obvious, right?
Yeah.
But the people doing the inventory have to have agent cards. Another thing I've noticed that people get in trouble with when going through this is to do the quarterly inventory counts, you can't be involved in the day-to-day operations.
Yep.
So you need to make sure you're having people outside the operations do those counts. We've talked about backup documentation, 2-person verified counts. What's the other thing you need for a metric cleanup?
The plan of correction, and that'll come in. We touched on investigation, so and through the investigation, you determine why it had happened. The plan of correction is the plan to hopefully eliminate those mistakes moving forward. And so, how are you going to address things? How are you going to prevent that same mistake that you discovered through your investigation that you conducted? How does it go away? You know, are you implementing new procedures? Are you training new people? Have you, implemented a new position in the company? We've seen people realize, hey, we really need somebody who is dedicated to inventory and the pre-rolls, and that's their job. And we've had so many mistakes with people not opening the boxes, people not actually counting everything. So now this is somebody's actual responsibility, and you can tie it back. And so they are ensuring that every pre-roll is counted, and it's a documented process throughout it. Whatever is a solve to the, you should be solving your problems and effort to not make them happen in future.
Yeah, and let's talk about what are some corrective actions. You've talked about you can hire a new person, you can put new procedures in place. I've seen some things as simple as we're going to weigh our product more frequently. We think it's all due to moisture loss, but because we were only weighing once a quarter, we weren't capturing it, right? So we'll weigh more frequently.
Yeah.
Like you said, you've seen some where it's hire people. I've seen some where it's, we're going to slow down. We had so many entry errors because it was people trying to type the numbers really fast, and we're going to slow down and try not to enter all of those. So it really can vary depending on what's the cause of the variance.
Mm-hmm. And it could be very simple, like slow down. Just slow down.
Yeah.
Understand what you're doing in the process, and you're there to accurately enter a number into a key, a computer.
Or finish packages.
Yeah, that's a big one too. My understanding, it's a fairly simple process, and you could knock out quite a few at a time, but a lot of companies don't, or they...
they don't finish it, and then for whatever reason, someone accidentally adjusts out of it, and then it goes into a negative quantity. So finishing packages could be an easy fix.
Mm-hmm.
So you need backup documentation. You need a plan of correction after you've investigated.
Mm-hmm.
You need a 2-person verified count. What else do we need?
Well, so from the 2-person verified count, you can create a variance-only spreadsheet, which shows only the variances, and then afterwards, once you have all of your documentation, you can get the actual ticket number from Metric.
But I think that step's critical. You do it after
Yes.
you've done everything else,
Yep.
right? You do your investigation, you do your count, you do your variance-only spreadsheet, you decide what your corrective actions are, write up your plan of correction, and then you reach out to Metric for a ticket number. Why don't you do it in the beginning?
It puts the CCB on notice of the need to do the inventory cleanup, and they expect the submission to happen fairly quickly after that metric cleanup is ticket numbers obtained. And the investigation and the 2-person counts, it is a lengthy process in some instances, and then you just have to answer more questions.
And besides that, I've learned Metric tickets expire.
That is true.
So if you request the Metric ticket number and then your investigation takes some time because you're reviewing all of your packaging logs, all your waste destruction logs, trying to figure out what was the cause of the variance, your ticket may expire.
Mhm.
So requesting it at the end. And then you put the whole package together.
Yep.
Submit it to the CCB.
Nice cover letter on top.
Yep.
And hope for the best.
You don't just cross your fingers and
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
fingers crossed. I
Yeah.
hope the CCB, but they will review it. They may have questions if the backup documentation doesn't explain the cause, right? Hopefully it's as pretty and clean as Kevin explained, that we typed in 500 to metric, but here's our log that shows we only produce 400, let us adjust. That kind of clean one, the CCB usually will approve. It's the ones where we're missing 100 and we don't know why.
Yep.
Those are where they probably dig in more and try and figure out what's causing issues with your inventory.
Yep. The more you know, the better.
The more you know, the better. Get that star. The more you know. So, but I think I am happy that Nevada's regulations have this metric cleanup process, because inventory is so critical to compliance. But we all know that mistakes happen, right? There's human error, things are going to happen. So it's nice that our regulations allow people to do this, to get on the right track, instead of like some states where it's just an automatic violation if you have an issue.
I think just one point to add is, you're making adjustments through this process and using the correct adjustment code and going into your metric guidelines and figuring out what codes are permitted in the state of Nevada, and then understanding what each of them do and then using them correctly. And I think that is very helpful
That is
throughout
true.
the entire process.
And speaking of adjustments, if you need a metric cleanup, it also in red says this on the form, but you cannot make any adjustments of any variance, even if it's just a plus or minus one. You can't make any adjustments until the metric cleanup's approved.
Correct.
And I think that's a common misconception that we've seen, is sometimes people think that they can make adjustments as long as it wouldn't have been what would be considered a significant variance on its own, but once it becomes part of a metric cleanup, it's a variance that you can't touch until it's approved.
Yep.
Yeah, all the variances, regardless of their size, you can't make adjustments if you need a metric cleanup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.